Good evening, good morning, wherever you may be. Streaming to you from the East Coast to the left coast and around the world on UCY.tv. This is All Things Apocalyptic with G. Michael Hopf. So, how is everybody doing out there around the world on the internet? I'm doing okay. Been gone for 2 weeks. Last week something just kind of popped up and I couldn't make it, so I apologize that there wasn't a show, there wasn't a guest. But tonight I have a really, really great guest, and I'm really, really excited about having him on. But before I kind of get into that, I'm a guy, I like to kind of jump on the Drudge Report now and then. I'm sure everyone's probably heard of the Drudge Report out there. And what's funny is that we've been talking about this Ebola thing for weeks now. I mean, I've had a show, actually kind of two shows kind of about it with two guests. And it just kind of keeps popping up in the news. And every time it keeps popping up in the mainstream news, it seems to be getting worse. I'm a little cynical about that in some regards, but what's interesting is I'm looking at the headline on the Drudge Report right now. He has this big blood splatter, and it says World War E. And of course, any of you that do monitor the news know that the president today was down at the CDC down in Georgia and kind of gave a speech. And essentially, we're declaring war on Ebola now, I guess, and we're not going to put boots on the ground in Syria, but we're going to put boots on the ground down in Africa. So I guess we got 3,000 some troops heading that direction. What they're going to do down there, I have no idea. But I'll tell you, being a former member of the military, going into battle against kind of an enemy that you can see or actually can fight against it, that's just kind of, I don't know if I would want that assignment. I think that might suck. I really just don't know if I'd want to be assigned to an area where there's an infectious disease that's kind of apparently running rampant, and as Obama said, spiraling out of control. And we need to stop it before it turns into hundreds of thousands of infected people. So here it is. Ebola's back in the news again, and so much that the President of the United States is doing something about it. There's a perception that something's going to be done about it. We shall see. I did listen to him today, and I have to admit that when I listen to him, I have to make sure I don't vomit when I do it. But so I'm listening to him, and he's talking about he's going to do the best to protect our nation from any kind of an infectious disease, specifically Ebola, from crossing our borders. And he didn't say crossing our borders. He essentially said coming into any ports of entry. And if I were to ask him the question, I would ask him this: if you're really truly concerned about something coming into this nation, then why is our border, specifically our southern border, wide open? You're really that concerned about something horrible coming across, but yet you will do nothing to protect our southern border? Speaks volumes in and of itself. So, Ebola back in the news. Yay. I'm excited about our guest tonight because we've talked about all kinds of other type of apocalyptic scenarios happening. One of the things we've never talked about or had a guest on to discuss is meteors and asteroid impacts. But tonight our guest, he's a writer. His latest book is a bestseller, and it deals with a group of people surviving or attempting to survive after an impact. Our guest tonight holds a master's degree in international relations and has pursued diverse interests in career paths, including international trade, travel marketing, charter aviation, and construction management. However, one of his main passions is the apocalypse, and that's why he's here. He is the founder of ApocaCon. It's a convention-style event which promotes apocalyptic fiction, as well as he's also the author of 8 distinct works, including Voyage of the Dead, Flotilla of the Dead, and Deluge of the Dead, which are all from the Sovereign Spirit Saga trilogy. He also has, his latest book is a #1 Amazon best-selling apocalyptic sea adventure, Sedulity. I think I pronounced that correctly. If I didn't, when you come on, please correct me. Which was inspired by a classic post-apocalyptic book, Lucifer's Hammer. So somewhere from a bunker location in Malibu, California, I have the honor to have on David Forsyth. David, are you there?
I am, Michael. How are you doing tonight?
Great, great. I'm really happy to have you on. I'm so glad you could come on at such a last minute.
Thanks for inviting me. And your intro was also very interesting. I've been following the Ebola crisis and the way it's doubled in the number of casualties in the last month or two. It's horrendous.
Yeah, it's I still don't think we have too much to worry about here. I mean, for the most part, I mean, we don't. We have some issues with our healthcare, but for the most part, we pretty much have a first world healthcare system. But then you have the cynical side of me that's just saying this could be a delivery device to start for some of the bad, nefarious people to start doing some bad things and maybe putting into place some of their plans for whatever they want to do with us.
Absolutely,
turn us into that police state that they eventually want.
Yeah, or just through not being vigilant. I mean, it has a cycle of 20 days before they're symptomatic. So we've already had people flying out of the area going to Nairobi and to Nigeria, even to England. So with today's modern air travel, in fact, one of my novelettes, it's called Lucan, actually describes how an apocalypse might begin by a group dispersing an infectious disease on airplanes and traveling around the world, spreading it in a matter of weeks. So that would be on purpose, of course. But Ebola, I've been worried about since reading The Hot Zone back in, I think, 1994. So it's been on the radar, but luckily hasn't hit us yet.
Well, and I kind of go back and we'll dive into your books. I really want to get into that. But since we kind of touched on that, I have to look at when the president makes these comments about he's doing whatever we can do to make sure these things don't come to a port of entry. But then you have our southern border the way it is. I can't see how he can with a straight face. But then again, he's a politician, so he can always look at us with a straight face and lie to us. And our southern border is just wide open, and especially with that kind of where someone can be a carrier of it and not be symptomatic for 21 days. You could send dozens or hundreds of people across that are infected and spread them across the country.
Yeah, it's a very scary scenario, and you're right. I don't think we're prepared for it in the slightest, not even at the airports, because they're not going to be taking people out of line and testing them, even unless or until they're showing the symptoms, and they might not do that for a week after arrival. So how do you know? Yeah,
the only way to do it is to prohibit those people those passport holders from coming to the country. That's it. It's the only thing you can do.
Mm-hmm. But again, as you say, with a porous border, that's not going to work either. So.
Yeah. Well, David, why don't you, I kind of touched on some stuff in your bio. Why don't you kind of introduce yourself to the audience here, to all the listeners that are out there around the world?
Okay. Well, no, you did a good job. I can just say I started writing let me get rid of this. Sorry. I started writing in 2011, and then I put my first 3 books out in 2012, and those were all a zombie apocalypse story, but with a twist. Voyage of the Dead and the sequels feature the main characters aboard a ship at sea. So again, we're talking about a pandemic situation with, in this case, a zombie virus, super rabies going around the world, but these people at sea are isolated from it and not infected. So that kind of relates to what we were just talking about. And it added a new dimension to the zombie genre, I believe, as far as, giving another safe haven opportunity besides going to a bunker or a farm or some fortress in the woods.
Yeah, and then your latest novel, the bestseller. What are we talking about here?
Sedulity really is a change of gear, and it was really well received. Sedulity, first, the word means constant in purpose, steadfast, tireless, indefatigable, and it relates to the name of a ship, again. In this case, it's a cruise ship, and thousands of passengers aboard this cruise traveling from California to Australia. And when they're in the middle of the Pacific Ocean, there is an unexpected asteroid impact in the middle of the sea. So I won't go into the details of what transpires from there, but you can imagine just about every kind of natural calamity possible as a result of a large asteroid strike.
What was the size? Just because I'm curious, what was the size of the asteroid that you have depicted in your novel?
Almost a mile wide, a large one. And you might say, how did that creep up on us? But it's pretty scary. We have dozens of pretty good-sized strikes per year that go unreported and without warning. And then since 2002, there have been over 24 occasions where multi-kiloton explosions have taken place in the atmosphere, enough to trigger our nuclear detonation warning devices and sensors and satellites. So that is, NORAD just released that data earlier this year as far as how often we actually get hit by these things. And luckily, it's usually in an uninhabited area or out over the ocean. But we really are just, it's a matter of time. It's happened before, and it will happen again when something doesn't explode in the atmosphere and actually makes it down to an impact event.
Well, what was that number that you discovered? Yeah, I'm sure you did a lot. I know what I do for my books, and I know you do the same thing. In your research, as far as near Earth objects and eventually the ones that actually do make contact with the Earth, how frequently is it? Because I think people are going to be surprised by the number.
Yeah, well, let's just take some of the more recent ones of the larger ones. You've got the largest recent strike was over Chelyabinsk, I think it is, in Russia, in February of 2013, and that injured over 900 people on the ground, knocking down structures, and it really made the news. A piece of that, about 1,000-pound piece of that, actually fell into the lake there, Lake Chelyabinsk, or however you pronounce that, and it caused some large waves, which led the scientists to search for it, and they actually found it after a few months there in the bottom of the lake. So it's not really that uncommon. We've had another one more recently that exploded over upstate New York. That was, I believe, earlier this year or the end of last year. Again, no damage on the ground, but a big explosion, big sonic boom, and some, a little bit of impact damage from the blast. So these things, the largest that we've had in recent history is the Tunguska event in 1908, and that was probably a comet that exploded over Siberia, and it flattened trees for hundreds of square miles. But again, luckily there were a few people living in Siberia, so we don't, have a lot of reported casualties. The one that I remember that really was scary was in 2002, I believe it was right after the turn of the century. There was a large explosion over the Mediterranean Sea, and it would have been devastating if it went off over a city. It was multi-kilotons. But if it had arrived just a few minutes earlier, it would have blown up over Israel. Or an hour earlier, it would have blown up over Pakistan and India. And tensions were high in that region at the time. It could have easily been misinterpreted as a nuclear air blast. And how would they react? So even an asteroid that doesn't hit the ground but explodes in a critical situation could have political ramifications, that are amazing.
Oh no, you're right. I would agree. Something like that over Pakistan or India, and those two nuclear powers are kind of trigger happy, and they probably wouldn't even wait to. And again, if it was, imagine if it was over Karachi and we're looking at it and just devastated the city. What would they do? How would they, respond? And
there goes New Delhi. Exactly.
Yeah.
So these are, and all of these that I'm talking about came completely unexpected. There was no prediction of their arrival. There's a lot of effort going into finding near-Earth objects. NASA just recently, I think in the last few days, said that their goal is to get 90% of them in the next decade identified. But it's a huge, gargantuan task, and we have a huge blind spot. Everything coming at us from the direction of the sun, we don't see coming until it arrives. We actually see these things once they've missed us, because if an object has a near pass of the sun and gets slingshotted back out towards us, our telescopes can't look at it. Even the space-based telescopes are hard-pressed to pick out a little something in the glare of the sun coming towards us. So that's really the big blind spot, and there's actually a group of scientists and 4 former NASA astronauts who've recently come together to try and raise funds for a satellite that would orbit between the Earth and the Sun to look for these things. Now, that, of course, begs the question of what do you do when you spot it? So that's it comes down to that. What do you do? And then people have always had that question. I'm sure you've probably talking with friends and colleagues, and that question always comes up. And if the government, or NASA being part of the government, if they were to spot something like this, would they tell us? That's question
your thoughts
number one, and then could they do anything about it? So, but yeah, I think It depends on the size of it and what they could do about it. If there were nothing they could do, they may indeed not tell us. They might just try and prepare for, a few select survivors if it's a, extinction level event going back to Deep Impact or, But again, most of those movies that we've seen, whether it be Meteor or Deep Impact or Armageddon, pretty fake science involved there as far as deflecting the asteroids. You can have an effect with nuclear weapons as far as breaking up a smaller asteroid into pieces that might not be as harmful upon impact, but it's really hard to deflect the course because you don't have any atmosphere to push against. When you're, setting off explosions like that, unless it's a focused blast that actually pushes it in a direction, or using something like a solar sail, or if you have years in advance notice and can get there. Other than that, there's not a lot you can do about a big object that's headed for the Earth.
Yeah, there's always been the controversy, too, that if you take a larger object and you blow it, you do manage to detonate it with a nuclear weapon, you could make the problem worse by all of a sudden now you have larger chunks that now just disperse all over the planet.
Yeah, personally, I would rather take my chances with a dozen smaller ones than one planet killer, because the force of the explosion itself, the impact, is just so immense if it's concentrated. It could wipe out half of the planet. I'm talking about the dinosaur killer. Now, in Sedulity, my recent book, it was a mile wide, so it's a very big object, something similar to an extinction event, but since it blast effects from. Imagine the type of tsunamis that it would generate around the entire Pacific Rim, not to mention the earthquakes that would be triggered around the Ring of Fire. I won't go too much in depth because I hope people will want to read it.
No, and everybody should. David's writing is phenomenal. So if you haven't picked up his books yet, please do. I'll actually jump on the chat room here in a minute, and I'll throw up some links to your stuff on Amazon.
Yes.
So talking about kind of the deflection now, I was reading something about if they had some time, and you mentioned that the solar sail concept, where essentially you land kind of almost like a satellite, then it deploys like a solar sail, and it literally tries to navigate the asteroid, or it just changes its trajectory slowly, so it eventually just goes away from us.
Right, and if you have enough time, and we're talking like close to a year, or at least months in advance, all you need to do, the longer you can have in advance, the less you have to deflect its course. So, a very minor course change of less than a degree is going to be enough to miss the Earth if you do it far enough out in space. The closer it gets, of course, the more problematic.
Now, is that Now, I know we're landing a satellite on a comet coming soon. So apparently we kind of have that technology to do that now, for the most part.
To land it, yeah. To deploy a solar sail, I mean, that's theoretical. We haven't, there's been talk of sending out interstellar probes using a solar sail as propulsion, but we haven't done it yet. I mean, we know what it would entail, but basically a solar sail has to be hundreds of miles wide. So you're talking about a polymer type, very thin sheeting that's going to catch the solar wind, which are only, atomic particles that are coming out from the sun, photons and little particles. So you need a huge, huge area. I mean, you'd need something the size of the United States, let's say, as far as a sail, to really change the course of a sizable asteroid.
That large? I've read something about it, but that's massive.
I may be exaggerating. I'm not a scientist, but it's got to be. I mean, I'm thinking worst case, a large asteroid. But even for something less than a mile wide, it's going to take something the size of at least a state. It's got to be a lot, because you're trying to move a solid object using light, photons of light.
Now, how accurate are they? If they plotted one out that was a few months out, would they be able to determine exactly where it was going to hit? Now, say it wasn't a world killer, but essentially something that was half mile wide, something that if it hit a city, it's going to level a city. Are are they good enough with plotting where it specifically would impact, or they would just give a general idea it'll hit northern hemisphere, southern hemisphere, something along that line?
Right. I think they would have basically a time of impact, and then a lot of factors are going to come into play about, the exact angle of attack when it hits the Earth. Is it going to skip a little ways? Is it going to dive straight in? We've had meteors or small asteroids that have bounced off and skipped off of the atmosphere and off into space without coming in. And we've had others that blow up before they get to the ground. You never know, unless you know the actual composition of the object coming in, what it's going to do when it impacts the atmosphere. So I don't think they could bring it down to saying, okay, it's going to be, Pittsburgh's gone instead of, New York. But they would be close in as far as the hemisphere and the time, because of the time of arrival.
Got it. Yeah, I've often wondered that, if they could pinpoint it. And you're right. I do know why some explode in the atmosphere and some don't, because it is about the composition of the asteroid itself. Determines whether it can withstand the atmosphere and actually make an impact into the planet.
Mm-hmm. And we wouldn't know that without landing and testing and all of that. And it's not going to happen.
It just seems, I think it's only because we have the satellites, we have the technology now, but. And I know nothing's changed, but you look at it's almost like every couple of weeks you hear about, there's a meteor coming by, or an asteroid's flying in between us and the moon. I think just something like that happened just like a week ago or 2 weeks ago.
A week ago there was one that passed actually closer. It came between our geosynchronous satellites less than 23,000 miles away. The moon's 250,000. So this was really a near miss, and it was only discovered a week before it passed. Now, it was only the size of, say, a Greyhound bus. It wasn't a planet killer or anything. But it's scary that something can sneak up on you like that real quick, and nothing we could have done about it if it had decided to come in. In fact, there was a piece of it that fell off and impacted just outside of the capital of Managua in Nicaragua and made a crater 30-something feet wide. So it wasn't devastating, but that's what it's been reported is a strike from a piece of that passing asteroid.
Yeah, I'd heard about that. I know there was some controversy. Some people saying it wasn't a strike,
right?
But who's to know?
They're investigating. I'm not relying on I am relying, I should say, on the reports out of Nicaragua. We have to see if NASA or somebody goes down and corroborates. But it was quite a coincidence.
Yeah. Now I'm looking at some NASA data right now. And it talks about, as of September 12th, 2014, they have discovered 11,455 near-Earth objects. Mm-hmm. And of them, some 863 of these NEOs are asteroids with a diameter of approximately 1 kilometer or larger. Now, something of that size, what would that do?
Well, that's basically what I described in sedulity, something a little larger than a kilometer, closer to a mile. And I actually used a impact generator that's listed as a link at the back of the Kindle edition of Sedulity, and you can go and actually compute your own asteroid strike. You put in the size, the type of impact it's going to make. Is it going to be in water? Is it going to be on land? What's your distance away from it? And it'll tell you. It'll say how long it'll take for the blast wave to get to you, how much overpressure there's going to be, the speed of the blast wave. I'll give you an example for the Sedulity, the ship, which was 100 miles away from the impact point in the book. The blast wave is traveling at 760 miles an hour and arrives in under 8 minutes after impact. And then 30 minutes later, you're looking at a 1,000-foot tsunami, impact-generated tsunami headed that direction. So those are the kind of event, and this is all coming straight out of a computer-generated program from I think it's College of London or London University. Anyway, very interesting stuff. And Princeton as well. So they've calculated that you can basically do your own design of what your asteroid impact's going to be like, and then make your story from there.
That was fun, right?
It was. And what was interesting is I had written 2/3 of the book before I found that generator. And when I found that 90-something% of what I had written was correct, it just blew my mind because I was going, well, and I based, like I said, I was inspired a lot by Lucifer's Hammer. real classic that I read in high school and have read at least half a dozen times again since. And that was really my inspiration. And when I decided to write it, although I was on a cruise ship myself when I came up with the idea, and I said, nobody's ever really written about what it would be like to be out here in the middle of the ocean when this happens. So I went from there. But they have similar events that take place in Lucifer's Hammer as far as tsunamis and the weather effects.
So you're out there, you're on a cruise yourself, and you come up with the idea for the book. As well as your zombie series, your trilogy also takes place. There's a ship there as well. Let's kind of change course here and talk about, a lot of people think if there's some kind of event that occurs, some people might bug in, some people will bug out. Very few people, I very, very rarely, if ever, hear people talking about bugging out on a ship. Let's talk about that.
Yeah, that's my top choice. Now, of course, I live near the ocean. I don't have a big yacht, but it's something that I might want to acquire under the right circumstances. But yeah, I mean, in my books, we're usually talking about larger ships and groups of people that are aboard them, but in an actual personal evacuation scenario, I'd be looking for something along the lines of a motor sailor, something with solar power cells or wind generator, and preferably a water maker, and a long endurance, so that you could let's say it was Ebola, but an airborne form that had mutated, and you're talking about a massive pandemic spreading around. Being on a ship is one of the best ways to quarantine yourself and get away from the possibility of contamination. So there's many. I wouldn't do it, by the way, for an asteroid strike at sea. You're not going to want to head out to sea when the tsunamis are heading your way. But for almost every other kind of apocalyptic scenario, from zombies to EMP, even, I don't know, then a sailboat especially would be a viable option.
Yeah, but think. Let's go toward like the cruise ship, because you hear about billionaires and millionaires getting together and wanting to create self-sustainable floating islands or floating countries.
Sure.
And you hear about there's a guy actually in Southern California. I think he's in Del Mar. He's purchased several old missile silos in kind of the plain states out there, and he's built luxury bunkers for people, kind of almost like taking it and then compartmentalize it or kind of minimized it and turn these into luxury kind of bunkers for the apocalypse, kind of a thing.
I've seen some. Yep.
Yeah, and that gets me thinking then, because I've never thought about it. And if anyone that's in the chat room, Renee, has seen anything like this or heard anything, or as far as someone taking an old ship and then essentially putting together groups of people, that is your bug out. As long as you can get to the dock and you're there on time, you have your bug out. Your bug out goes with you, and you go out to sea, and it's self-sustainable.
It certainly makes sense. I mean, and there are a lot of retiring cruise liners, overnight ferries. In the Sovereign Spirit saga, Voyage of the Dead, it's actually very similar to that, although he didn't design it for that purpose. But he buys an old long-distance North Sea ferry that has a vehicle deck that can carry like 100 or more vehicles down there, so he can bring his sports cars. And the owner, by the way, won the Mega Lotto here, so he's got $300 million, and this is how he decides to spend it. This is before the zombie outbreak, mind you. So, so that's basically his personal bug out location. But again, he's caught at sea on his way back from his trip around the world when the zombie apocalypse takes place. So that's in that story. But I could see the same thing, that type of ship being used by a collective, a group of people getting together to say this is where we go when it hits the fan. It would certainly work. Another one that I just thought of, and I had thought of in the past, is these off of the coast of Santa Barbara and other places in the Gulf Coast. There's a lot of old abandoned oil rigs platforms. They're stationary, but they're out there at sea. And I don't know if a person. I thought of it when you mentioned the silos, because that's another option. If you were to find a stationary one, there's some old forts and stuff off of the coast of England as well that I've seen that are abandoned and could easily be turned into a survival location.
Yeah, what's interesting is I used to be a bodyguard years ago, and I worked for a client, and he ended up expatriating himself, but yet he still wanted to, and so therefore he had to spend a certain amount of time offshore. And before he ended up buying a property in a Caribbean island, I don't want to give too much information on him, he wanted to buy a jackup rig. Because you have some of those platforms that are literally are jack up. They actually are self-propelled, or they're towed, and then you put them in place, and then their legs go down, and then they jack themselves up.
Right.
And he was looking at buying one of those, and essentially, refurbing it and turning it into luxury, and then that was going to be his home away from home when he wasn't in the United States. But he ended up going, not doing that. But he was having some issues because he had to be in international waters, so he had to be 50 miles off, and it was being problematic with using a jackup. And so there's a lot of it was and theoretically it was easier. The concept was easier than the actual practical use of it. So he ended up not doing that.
Sure.
But yeah, because I've been through Santa Barbara. You see the rigs out there.
Yeah, most of them are active, but there's a couple that are too close to shore, and they were shut down after the '69 spill. So those are abandoned. Be interesting to turn into an off-sea mansion there.
Yeah, I just cruised through Santa Barbara about a month and a half ago, and I always think it's so strange because you just don't really see that anymore off the coast of California when you see those platforms out there. I see them, and my mind always goes right to Texas and Louisiana, because you always see platforms there. But to see them off the coast of California, it just doesn't seem right anymore because everyone's so environmental and everything out here. So it's always so strange to see them sitting out there.
Yeah, well, 680,000 barrels a day from the Santa Barbara Channel. So that's, it's a pretty considerable field. It's one of the largest in the West Coast and should keep pumping for a while. But yeah, I grew up in Santa Barbara, and they've been out there. There's more of them than there used to be, but they've been there all my life for the last 50 years.
Huh. Yeah, there's some there. I took the 101 from San Jose instead of taking the 5, and took the 101 down. And there's some big oil fields on the coast. I mean, actually, inland as well.
Sure.
I think just north of Santa Barbara. I think it was north of Paso Robles. No, it was south of Paso Robles.
Yeah, Gaviota has them. There's quite a few locations. California has a lot of oil. It's something I explore in my second and third books of the Sovereign Spirit Saga, when they set up a safe haven at Terminal Island in Long Beach Harbor, and then they're branching out and they're trying to find how are they going to. It's my apocalypse stories aren't necessarily the end of the world. It's like, how would you rebuild and continue on after most of it's been destroyed or lost. So those are issues that they bring up. They discuss, well, where can we get more fuel, because they've got this flotilla of ships. How are we going to refine it? What are we going to do? Where do we get food? So it gets a little bit more in depth than just running around shooting zombies.
Well, I've always defined the apocalypse, and I did that in the show earlier. I don't necessarily think it's the end of the world, meaning like a big massive asteroid hits and the world explodes into pieces.
Right.
I think, we don't have always defined some past historical events as apocalyptic, but the apocalypse is essentially when something changes, and it changes dramatically, and most of the times it's very violently, and your world is never the same. And there's chaos, there's a power vacuum that occurs, and then things eventually gel back together, but they're never the same. I've often believed World War I and World War II had some kind of apocalyptic, for certain, maybe not for us, but
for hundreds of millions, yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, for other millions or hundreds of millions, it was apocalyptic. Where the countries that entered into those conflicts were not the same. I mean, literally, borders changed. They were different nations, or some nations just failed to exist afterwards. So things for those people living there were gone forever. In World War II, I mean, truly, if people look at, you study the history of it, was a true global conflict. There was fighting everywhere.
Yep.
And that kind of goes back into this. I was. If you look at all the stuff that's going on in the Middle East, and someone made a comment to me the other day about how there, and rightfully so. Our foreign policy sometimes can really piss people off. But the thing is, someone was talking about the occupation of Iraq. I was like, well, they're probably mad about that, but they're probably also mad about the fact that we occupied them during World War II. And a lot of people don't know that, that the Soviets and the British invaded Iran, and it occupied it for a while. And then, and then
we had the Tehran conference there, where we all met up in Tehran with Stalin and I think it was Truman by that point. But yeah, so we had taken that over, and we installed the Shah afterwards again.
Yeah.
So
we've been over there a long time before 2003 and occupying. So. But look at those people. Their countries are still in flux. If you ask those people that are dealing with the threat of ISIS, they're living in apocalyptic vision right now.
Right. Well, and you look at Syria. I mean, the border between Syria and Iraq is imaginary. It was created in Versailles at the end of World War I. There's no difference between the people on one side or the other, and now there's no more border. Now that ISIS has taken over between the two. So you're seeing, if they had done it the way maybe they should have in the past, there would have been a Kurdistan, which actually there was under, originally in the Versailles Treaty, there was supposed to be an independent Kurdistan. And then there would have been something for the Sunnis and something else for the Shia. Instead, they were actually kings who were put in originally, the king in Iraq. But it was an amalgamation of peoples that have never really gotten along. So it's a powder keg. It's just like the Balkans, and what happened there in Yugoslavia.
Yeah, it's a pure mess.
Mm-hmm.
So I want to talk about you founded Apocacon. Why don't you tell the listeners what it is, and if I know you've got one coming up on the 27th, right, of September.
Yeah, coming up just in, not this weekend, the following weekend. It'll be the third Apocacon, and I started it in 2012 with a couple of other talented authors. Dan Williams, who does the Mace of the Apocalypse series, and Salt and Pepper, who does the Game Land series, also zombie books. They joined me down there in Long Beach for the Long Beach Zombie Walk. And I had found out about it. It had been going on for a few years, and they get like 10,000 people coming down to have a big party and dress up like zombies. They have makeup artists and everything. I said, boy, that would be a good place to promote zombie fiction, and especially since it was right in front of the Queen Mary and Port of Long Beach, which play a big role in my books. But I didn't really want to go down there alone, so I called around and got a few other authors that would be interested in joining me. And it was pretty successful as far as getting exposure and getting the word out. And then the following year it grew. We had twice as many authors. We had 9 last year. We had some great people showed up, like Craig DeLuey and Peter Klein, and just a lot of really good authors. This year, though, we decided instead of going to the Zombie Walk, we're doing it at the Long Beach Comic Con, which is the end of this month. So that's more of an environment related to people that are more interested in reading, let's say, than going to the beer garden and listening to the band. So I'm hopeful that that's going to pick up and take off. There'll be an Apocacon panel hosted by the Comic-Con. We have some great authors there, Nick Cole from the Wasteland Saga and Old Man in the Wasteland. Quite a few others. Dan Williams will be there again. A.R. Shaw does the China pandemic, I think it is. Anyway, so it's really, I think it's going to grow. We had a great sponsor last year who provided us with some big Apocacon banners that I'm real proud of. So we plan to use them at more and more events. And what's nice about it, what I like to do is get indie authors to pitch in on the cost of a booth at one of these larger events. And then we can, share, instead of, each spending $500 for a booth, we can each spend $100, take turns sitting at the table signing our books, and have a base of operations and presence there for indie authors. So it helps make it affordable and promote the genre of apocalyptic fiction, which is the real goal.
Yeah, now I know when we were talking earlier, you because of the success you've had with it, you're looking at expanding it to other cities?
Yeah, well, I like to, get it at World Horror Con, at Fright Weekend, or down in Dallas, in Texas. There's a few major cons around the country that we could expand into as it grows. You know what? The real goal is to get an apocalyptic fiction section in a bookstore. And right now, if they've got room for a shelf that says paranormal romance, they should have something for apocalyptic and post-apocalyptic and dystopian fiction, because it's really a popular genre, and I think we have enough of following that we really deserve to be recognized.
Oh, I would agree with you. I find it shocking that they don't have categories. You know, we have Amazon, which recognizes it, but just a couple years ago, it didn't have a category that was post-apocalyptic.
Exactly.
That was a category that was just added 18 months or 2 years ago or something along that.
Right.
Along that, I remember, because when my first book came out, I think that category just opened up right after I published it.
It wasn't there in 2012 when I started, and it was a choice between horror and science fiction adventure, and which my books did fine in. But when the Apocalyptic came out, I was able to move up the charts a little more, and so I'm really happy about that. And then dystopian as well, which Sedulity's made it pretty high on dystopian as well, those charts. So I really praise Amazon in doing that, because it's something that there have been a lot of discussion about. Why do they have paranormal romance? Why do they have these different genres without subdividing some of the science fiction and the horror as well? So I think they did a good job.
Yeah, no, I agree. But it's interesting. I had the honor of speaking at Comic-Con this year, and they put me on a horror panel. And I started thinking about that, because I would never have classified my books as horror. Mm-hmm. And they got back to me, the guy who was running the panel, and what he told me was apocalyptic fiction is kind of a subgenre of horror, meaning that when people read it, they typically are scared, or they get scared from reading the books. Mm. And I'm sure you've had this. I've had this experience. I get it quite often, where I get responses. And every other post-apocalyptic dystopian writer that I've talked with, when I ask them, and it's universal, that people will read our books and then they'll get back to us and goes, "Oh my God, that scared the crap out of me."
Right.
What you wrote, I'm like, I wasn't prepping before. Now I'm a prepper, or I never thought it could get this bad, and it scares them, but it scares them in a different way than say they were reading a book about a. It's just a little bit different.
Yeah, and I'm getting that from Sedulity, and I will tell you, I pulled my first books, which were a zombie apocalypse trilogy, but I always thought of them more as a science fiction adventure. With the ship and the way it's structured, it's more like bringing the concepts from Battlestar Galactica or Star Trek into that zombie genre, because they're moving on the ship from port to port, dealing with different events, and it's kind of set up to be that kind of a series. So I always thought of it more science fiction. Now, and I have pulled it out of horror now, because it's done really well in science fiction, adventure, and post-apocalyptic. So I don't feel bad about that. I mean, I'm not against horror in any way. In fact, I'm really pleased I was just accepted as an active member of the Horror Association. So that's the Horror Writers Association. So that's really a big step forward, that they're now accepting indie authors into their ranks as well, if they have enough sales. So things are moving forward in that whole direction, and I think there's going to be an evolution in how different books are categorized in the genres that we see in bookstores and online.
Yeah, no, I would agree. And by the way, congratulations on being taken in as a member for them. That's great. That's good news. It's so often a lot of those trade groups still are resisting allowing indie writers into their ranks.
Yeah, that's a little bit, it was disheartening, but it was very encouraging that they had, I think, 80% of their members voted to allow self-published authors into their ranks, as long as they met some criteria of earnings. So if they could show earnings, even off of Amazon Kindle, that were equivalent to what a published author would have gotten from a publisher, then they'll go, "You're in." So,
good. I hadn't heard of that. And I actually applaud them for doing that, because they're realizing what's happening. I mean, there's a revolution. To anyone that's listening out there that has any dream of ever wanting to write, You can always reach out to me. I'm sure you can reach out to David as well. I mean, both of us have been highly successful in self-publishing our works, and you can really, truly turn it into a business. There's something out there. If you've got an idea, Amazon specifically offers a platform for you to get your words out there and put it out in the world. It's amazing. You'll never ever hear me talk bad about Amazon. They're not a perfect company, but they're pretty damn close in my book.
They've been the best partner I've ever had, honestly. Yeah. I mean, very reliable. They don't play favorites that I've seen much. I will say I do like to encourage other new authors, as I'm sure you do, and it's been a pleasure to be able to give advice, even though I'm just a newbie. Like I said, I started writing in 2011. My first books came out in 2012, but it's such a new market. Things are so new, like KDP Select Publishing just started right when my books came out, and I sort of rode a wave with that, which helped a lot. It's gotten so much more difficult for someone to break in, I think, just in the last couple of years, though, because there are now millions of titles on Kindle. I think it's a new title every 5 minutes or less, and it's amazing and so hard to get recognized and noticed. You can have the best book and you release it without the right marketing and as an indie, and you don't get noticed, and it can fall down to number 2 or 3 million just because, not because it's a bad book, but because it wasn't discovered by enough readers to get noticed. So there are a lot of tricks. Actually, this weekend I'm at the Southern California Writers Conference in Newport Beach. They invited me. It was quite an honor to do a workshop there. And it's going to be titled Beating the Odds and How to Break Out as a KDP Author, so with Amazon. And I'm just going to share what I've learned and what I've seen happening in the industry, and hopefully it can be of value to others.
Well, this is going to be a departure from the topics we typically talk about, but I always get asked that question, and so I'll ask you that question. So you're going to go to this workshop, and these people are going to be looking at you and seeing someone who self-published their book, and it became successful on Amazon. What did you do to do that? That's the question I get.
Yeah, I know, and that's supposed to be what I'm going to explain to them all, and it's really, it's not that easy to explain, because I didn't really know what I was doing when I started, and like I said, I was lucky to start when KDP selected, so my first book I actually offered on 5-day freebies, giving them away. I gave away tens of thousands of copies because it was these free books were a new thing, and I wasn't, necessarily competing against a lot of people. But that worked well for a trilogy because I released 2 more books that year. And so all of those people that had gotten the first book for free went on to buy the second and the third. So that, for me, was I never paid any advertising. No paid advertising. I just gave away my first book as a loss leader. It's still free. Voyage of the Dead is free on all platforms, Amazon, Nook, Kobo, Apple. So I encourage anyone to grab that one for free. And if you like my work, I'm pretty confident you'll go on and buy the rest of them. And that's how it's worked for me. It doesn't work that way that well for everyone anymore because there are millions of free books now too. So just getting noticed even that way is no longer as easy as it was.
Yeah, no, I've noticed things change, and I noticed in the post-apocalyptic genre specifically, things have really picked up. There's a lot more books there, new books, than when I first published The End back in 2013. It's really, but I still think that space is still ripe. I was speaking with was it Steve?
Conkley?
Yeah, Steve Conkley. Sorry, thank you. God, my head. Hey, Steve, you're out there. Sorry. Hey, and he and I were talking, and I think the space we're in is still got a good run for a while. There's people that read the genre we're in. They're very fascinated. They're very interested in it, and they want more. And but anyone that is out there wanting to write, not only is it about it getting noticed, but when you do get noticed, make sure you've written a book that technically is been edited. That's the bane of anybody. You can have the best story, but it looked like it was written by a second grader, and you're done. So
Absolutely, absolutely. And I've made the error of going out with without professional edits, and then corrected it later down the line after the books had earned enough money and gotten reasonably good reviews, and then hired an editor. So I think it was a little better than a second grader, but everybody needs an editor. Even Stephen King uses an editor. So let's keep that in mind.
Oh no, editors are critical. I think I look at the editor I have with Plume, and they're kind of, it's like a collaborative effort in a lot of ways now. So,
right.
And anyone out there listening that has any desire in writing, you can always contact me. Contact David here. I'm going to go ahead and put up some links to your books from Amazon onto the chat room.
Thank you.
So people can get them, and I highly recommend you picking up his books. Great stuff. Seriously.
Thanks. And I have I'm working right now on finishing up Sedulity 2, Aftershock. So Sedulity did really well this year, and I'm hoping that the second book in the series is going to follow its example and be something popular here coming up towards the holidays.
Well, why don't you tell everybody out there what you have coming up, what you're doing, what's happening in your world?
Yeah, as I said, I'm focused on Sedulity 2, Aftershock. The first one is Sedulity 1, Impact. So in Sedulity 2, Aftershock, you get more of a feeling for what's happening around the rest of the world, but still from the perspective of these people aboard the ship mostly. They've restored their satellite television so they can see what's happening other places. Again, I won't give too many details, but I think it's a pretty enthralling, exciting story. Next on the platter is another edition of the Sovereign Spirit Saga that I've been working on for a while now, and I'm excited about that. So there's some of the hints as to where that series is going can be found in the prequels, which are contained in Interludes in Hell. And that's I released after the first 3 books, but it's 3 novella-length stories that are prequels, filling in some of the other characters and explaining how the zombie apocalypse in that series was released. And then beyond that, I have a whole other series that I've been outlining that I think is going to be really exciting. It combines the apocalypse. Again, there's a ship involved, and a bit of time travel. So that's going to be more of a pure science fiction story that I think people are going to find exciting.
Now, all your books tend to deal with ships. Why is that?
Okay. Honestly, I think I'm kind of sticking with the genre that I've made a mark in, because it wasn't overly explored and exploited at the time. And for example, with Sedulity, I had made a fan base with Voyage of the Dead and Flotilla of the Dead based on the ships. Then when I came up with the idea for the asteroid, I didn't design it this way, but it turned out that I was able to bring along, it was close enough to my previous work that all of the fans of my zombie apocalypse were now interested in the asteroid apocalypse, because again, it also had a familiar setting aboard a ship at sea. So I think that played a part in it. But I must say, Sedulity went farther, because the zombie fans brought it enough sales to get it noticed on the charts, and then it was the type of story that was really appealed to a wider audience than your typical zombie book too. So it took off that way. But for some reason, a lot of the stories that I come up with have been sea-based, and I haven't served in the Navy or really on a ship. I've owned some small boats, and I've been love to fish, and I've been on about a dozen cruises, but and I've always loved ships. But I wouldn't say I'm a maritime expert, although I do a lot of research for my books.
Well, I'll tell you one thing to anyone listening: the action you write is you're like an action adventure writer. It's really good. I'm serious. It's intense.
I appreciate it.
Yeah, it's very, very, very intense, and I appreciate that. I look at like what I write, and I think Apocalypse there is a violent kind of, when you're talking about the apocalypse, things get violent. And stuff happens, and I think there's always going to be a lot of action. I think that you're going to have good guys and bad guys, and the good guys will have to fight the bad guys, and the bad guys will try to do bad things. And so I tend my vision of the apocalypse always has very bad, violent things occurring in it. And when I was reading your stuff, I just loved how you're able to write action. I think that can be very, very difficult. It's like trying to, it's like having someone who writes really good romance, and then if you're into that, you're like, oh my god, she knows how to write a sex scene.
Right.
But I think there's talent. I think certain writers can write certain types of scenes really, really well, and you write an action scene very well.
Well, thanks. I appreciate it. And I know we're running out of time, but one question I always get is like, well, what advice do you have if I wanted to be a writer? What would you do? My advice has always been the same, and it's to read and read and read and read until you feel the need to write, and then write something you want to read. And it may be simplistic, but I've read several thousand books before I started writing, and I, always loved science fiction, and so that's kind of the genre that I think I belong in, and action.
Yeah, without a doubt. I get asked that question where the advice I give it goes back to the Hemingway, and I think he was being interviewed, and someone asked him, "What's the best advice you can give somebody who wants to write?" And he just said, "Just write."
Yeah.
And really that comes down to it. Your advice is perfect, and you're absolutely right. You kind of have to read. You have to know what's out there and what's been written before.
And also to get the feel of just how an action scene should flow. I mean, if you've read enough, you kind of, not to ever copy anyone, but you get a feel for how it's done.
Okay. Well, hey, we're down to like one more minute. Why don't you just tell everybody again where they can get your books, where your website is, how they can reach out to you, emails, all your contact information. I did put up your website, and I did put up a link to your Amazon author page, and all your book links are right there. So I put that in the chat.
That's perfect. And then on Facebook, I'm David P. Forsyth, and David P. Forsyth author page. That's where I'm most active. In fact, my website, I haven't really touched for over 6 months, so don't expect to catch me there. Look for me on Facebook, and I'll try and get that website updated soon.
All right. Well, David, I really appreciate you coming on the show. Again, it was last minute, but it was really a pleasure. I know you're really busy with everything you're doing and with getting your second book out, and it's going to be coming out soon. So I really, really appreciate you taking your time tonight.
Hey, thank you for inviting me, Michael, and I really wish you luck with this show. I think it has a lot of potential, and it's really something that would be valuable for a lot of people who are genre fans.
All right. Well, you take care tonight.
You too, Michael. Thank you.
Right.
Bye-bye.
Well, everybody out there, that's our show. Stay frosty, all right?